Hey, my name is Allie Howe. I'm the host of the Insecure Agents podcast. Today we have Ian Webster with us. He's CEO and co-founder of Promptfoo, which was recently acquired by OpenAI. Super exciting. We're in the middle of RSA here in San Francisco, and I'm super excited to chat with Ian about the recent acquisition and what made Promptfoo successful. Ian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks, Allie. Great to be here. Co-founder, CEO of Promptfoo, also the original author of the tool. So started the open source project at this point over 3 years ago, and happy to answer any questions that you have about the journey and how we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. Super excited to talk about the journey. But just to recap, so it closed like a week ago?
That's right. Yeah. So the deal closed a week ago. I think we announced it slightly beforehand the previous week. And the team is at OpenAI now, just working on the integration, keeping the work going on Promptfoo and so forth.
That's super exciting. And I think I read that you're going to be using your technology in Open Frontier or Frontier AI, I forget what it was called.
Yes. OpenAI has an initiative called Frontier, which is really like a product stack or packaging that puts together a lot of the great things about the OpenAI platform for the enterprise. So obviously, when you're thinking about a vertical platform for deploying AI in the enterprise, security, compliance, governance, like all those questions come up. That's a big part of what my team is going to be working on.
Amazing. Yeah, because Promptfoo did a lot. You're bringing a lot of technology to OpenAI from, it looks like a little bit of like ML-SecOps or like model provenance, like being able to understand what models are safe to use, but then also you did the LLM red teaming, evals, and then also helped on like the guardrail side as well. So like a full suite of tooling for the entire life cycle for AI application development, it seems like. Are you bringing all of that to OpenAI?
Yeah, so OpenAI bought the whole company, the products, the IP, and so forth. So I expect to, I think we'll be contributing to pretty much everything under the sun there. I will say our bread and butter with Promptfoo was and is red teaming, the adversarial testing or offensive testing, as well as we have a huge open source community around evals, which is not in the security space, but just general like product quality, functionality, that kind of thing. So that has always been our wedge. And if you ask me, I would say we have always done that much better than anyone else. The other aspects of our platform, like guardrails, for example, or some of the code scanning and so forth, those kind of followed from like, what do we see customers want after they have performed the sort of offensive testing.
Amazing. And then you said you started with an open source project. Was that just red teaming or what did that do?
So I started the open source project while I was at Discord. And at Discord, my teams were responsible for launching a bunch of different Gen AI features. And we actually first started using Promptfoo for general purpose evals, like product quality evals. This was in like the GPT 3.5 era. So it was like, is the AI behaving? Is it doing what you want it to do? That kind of thing. So Promptfoo started as a project not really in the security space, but more just in like, I guess you could call it ML ops or generally now just like AI development. It quickly became clear to me at Discord that like AI security was going to be a huge problem. And like Discord is a great company. It's relatively small, nimble. Like even at a company like Discord, we faced a lot of questions about like, hey, is this AI going to be secure? Is it safe for the end users? Are we like complying with policies? That kind of thing. So it's really like, if there was that much difficulty at Discord, I can only imagine what my bank is going through or like my hospital or that kind of thing. So that's when I started thinking about like, what is the most valuable type of eval that can be run, and landed on like those adversarial evals. And that's really where like red teaming and the whole security go-to-market angle came about.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's a really key part of your story, how you started with the red teaming, but not just from a security perspective, but from a performance perspective. Because I think a lot of people and companies obviously want the adversarial guardrails, but they also want guardrails around, okay, like I'm Ford, I don't want to recommend Tesla, so how can I test for that? And so if you're appealing to not only security, but to maybe product leaders or engineers, I think that's a really unique part of your story, and maybe that's one of the reasons why that you've been so successful, is because not only are you appealing to security, but people that care about performance.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. That is something that we have approached this a lot differently from other solutions in the space, where we started with that wide. I say evals, which is a bit of jargon, but on the AI side, evals is just like a fancy, or short for evaluations, just kind of like a fancy way of saying we're going to send a bunch of inputs and look at the outputs, and we're going to do this systematically and in a data-driven way. So I think that under the hood, any good red teaming solution in the AI context is going to have to take that approach. And to we managed to get that right just from a framework perspective, from like an open source and community perspective, and that gave it a lot of momentum. That meant that hundreds of thousands of developers were using this for their evals in AI development. And inevitably, when the security team is like, all right, so is it secure? How are we going to get this to production? Promptfoo was a tool already in their toolkit.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes sense. I think appealing to developers is like a secret weapon for security companies that they should really lean into more. And we're at Sneak Space today, filming out of there. I really appreciate them giving us the space, and I think that's probably a key to Sneak success as well. A security company can't just be a really great security company. It's got to be usable. It's got to be something that developers don't hate, that they want to use, that they see value in. And the things that developers care about might not be the same things that security teams care about. So if you're able to tell a developer, hey, if you use this tool, not only are you making your code most secure, but you're making it more performant, that's a huge win. I think that leads to it, a lot more adoption. And I think you did a really great job of also educating developers. I saw you had that Promptfoo evil MCP server that you all created to show the community, okay, here's all the scary security concerns MCP has, like rug pulls, tool poisoning, all of these things. And so how would you say that contributed to your success, that education aspect?
Yeah, I think so. In the earlier days, I say early days, but we're talking 2 years ago, one and a half years ago. So Promptfoo remained an open source project. So I started 3 years ago. It was open source for a year and a half, I guess at this point, close to 2 years ago. And then I began to commercialize it. At that point, about 2 years ago, when I was commercializing it, I was still having to explain to people what is the concept of AI red teaming. I was having to define evals for people. All this stuff that, it's still very much a moving target, but all this stuff is very new. So there was a ton of education, and this is evident in the details and the documentation that we released. And then I also experienced a lot of that, when people would come to us and say, hey, I'm interested. There was kind of this whole upfront educational component. I would say one thing that worked really well is we just have very extensive documentation, examples. We've tried to do as much as we can open source, and that's the only way that I know how to do things, but it turned out okay from that perspective.
Amazing. Do you credit the wide adoption of Promptfoo to the open source community, or was there any other go-to-market strategy, events that you deployed?
Yeah, no, I wish I knew how to do event marketing, or I wish I were good at networking and I don't know, cold emailing or whatever it is. I don't know how to do any of that. Our pipeline was almost 100% inbound, really attributable to open source. And I think the reason why that worked so well is there's a lot of snake oil or smoke and mirrors in both AI and cybersecurity. And when you put those together, there's just so much noise out there that having something that's open source that developers love, that security engineers can take off the shelf and start using and getting value out of, that speaks volumes. And I think that my approach here was just to do it and kind of show, don't tell. And that's what made it that really helped set up the trajectory on the business side as well.
That makes sense. And it seems like it's very easy to try Promptfoo as well. You're exactly where developers already are, and MCP, agent frameworks, CI/CD. It's very easy to try and see value quickly.
Yeah, it is. And there's a single command that you can run with npm or npx, and most developers will have that installed. So we tried to make it as easy to get started as possible. And we would measure and optimize the time to the aha moment where someone can see a result that makes them say, shit, maybe I should take this AI security thing more seriously. I mean, looking at it, there are still a bunch of places in the product where, especially on the configuration side, like that is too difficult and too slow. We did put a lot of effort into improving that and just trying to make it easy to onboard.
Yes, that makes sense. I think your platform's like particularly powerful because the red teaming insights can influence the guardrails in real time, and that feedback loop I think is what separates one LM guardrail company or a red teaming company from another, because there's a lot of like snake oil, like you were saying. Like some people will just have very rudimentary red teaming that just checks for the same like hate speech or like routine issue that I think that's very well commoditized. But what a lot of people aren't doing is allowing for those like custom guardrails around, hey, I'm Ford, I don't want to recommend Tesla, can you test for that? But also, can you take my red teaming results and have that influence my runtime security?
Yeah, I always tell people that's kind of the holy grail, regardless of whether you use Promptfoo or you prefer some other solution. You're going to want your offensive testing to feed back into your defensive setup. And you want that to be as seamless and frictionless as possible. And the reason why, like in this space in particular, that's so necessary is these AIs are essentially black boxes, which means that the only way there's no really like static scanning solution to AI security. There are parts of it where static scanning makes sense, but you actually do need something that uses live inference in order to say, hey, is this safe or not? And that's something that I learned very early on back at Google when we would test these black boxes. So, I think you do that testing and then you'll have a bunch of findings, and ideally incorporating those findings into your guardrails is turnkey. Now that's a lot easier said than done. So the way that Promptfoo works, at least on the commercial or enterprise side, is it will recommend remediations. So that's not always guardrails. It kind of depends what the issue is. Sometimes that could be at the prompt layer. Sometimes that's at the API, like something's fundamentally broken, like you screwed up access control. You just obviously need to fix that. But guardrails are a big component. I wish there were a standard guardrails kind of like definition or whatever, but there isn't. So we built a bunch of integrations for like these common guardrails. And then we also created our own guardrail offering that would just like learn from the findings and get automatically tuned from the findings. I think ultimately there are like two types of guardrails. There's kind of the generic out of the box classifiers. That's what most guardrails are that are just trained to like recognize hate speech or certain types of PII or whatever. And then there are guardrails that are adaptive and can actually be tailored toward your business context or your use case. And it's kind of that second bucket where there's actual, like substantial value there in getting that right. And I see more companies struggle with that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like a lot of companies just kind of like don't know where to start when it comes to AI security. So if you're able to offer this story, I feel like around your entire AI lifecycle, from like looking like the static code scanning to like the active like red teaming once you have something built, and then the runtime guardrail like influencing that with the results from the red teaming, that's a really compelling story of, hey, we've got your back all the way from shift left to runtime. One question I have is, where do you think is the right time nowadays to be like inserting this continuous testing, whether it's the scanning or whether it's the LLM red teaming? Because with something I'm noticing is a lot of people are trying to create like software factories where the coding agents will write all of their software, they will review everything and then deploy it. So it's very like highly autonomous and humans are in the loop as little as possible. So now I feel like security companies have the ability to, using an agent skill or MCP, that you can insert yourself into the agent harness so that if you do have some sort of autonomous like software factory, agents can use your tools to the scanning or the red teaming, take those results, and then automatically use those results to make their code better. Is that something that you're seeing teams want to do?
I sold mostly to like very large enterprises, so none of them are quite going the software factory route yet. We're also kind of blurring the lines here between just like traditional security vulnerabilities and AI security vulnerabilities, where Promptfoo was like very explicitly focused on what are all the ways that natural language can screw with your AI apps. And this is things like prompt injections, both direct and indirect, and jailbreaks and stuff like that. I would say, I mean, in general, my philosophy has always been these things need to be built securely from the start. I don't think that's an uncommon view. What I've seen in AI security specifically is everyone started all the way on the runtime side just because it looks the most like what they are used to. Like we're all kind of used to the concept of like a WAF, and you have something that checks the input and output or whatever. I think that is the least effective part of the AI security stack, especially if you're not doing that tuning of the guardrails from the red teaming outputs. So a lot of people are starting from the outside and going in, which is like fine if you come from that direction, but then you actually have to go in. So for Promptfoo, about 30% of our overall usage, remember this is across hundreds of thousands of developers, about 30% of that usage was in CI/CD. I think that's like a great kind of landing spot for Promptfoo or something like Promptfoo, where you conduct that sort of like smoke test or regression test, or you can gate it according to your security preferences. I wanted to move so we were landing there. I would wanted to move even further left toward developers. Like Promptfoo has a very robust CLI that like many developers like and use. And we actually recently launched IDE plugins. So I just want to be where the code is written, or in the world of software factories, like I want to be hooked into there as well. And I think that's going to basically become a requirement in AI security once the architectures get more complex and we're dealing with agents and not just chatbots and RAGs. And I think a lot of the existing AI security solutions are going to fall over flat or basically just become performative if they are not code aware as well as telemetry aware. Like during the actual testing, there needs to be some sort of observability hook in order to understand what is going on under the hood in the agents. So that was a long answer, but basically, like philosophically, yes, it should be early in the development cycle, but also very soon it will have to be early in the development cycle.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I think early makes sense, and then also just start from the inside and not just from the outside working in. Because I agree that I think a lot of people in 2025 was like, oh, all I need is an LM guardrail, and from whatever company, and I don't need to care like how strong their like threat team is on the back end that like implements these guardrails. I'll just pull anything off the shelf and I'll use it, and I'll be secure from prompt injection. And like that's not something that we saw. And a very like motivated threat actor will still continue to get through no matter how like good the models get, because adversarial attackers can use the models themselves to write better prompt injections. And one thing I really have liked that I've heard in my network is this concept of like, you need to count on the agent to do the wrong thing, or you need to count on like it being compromised by a prompt injection. Like it will happen. So in the event that it does, what are your hard boundaries that you've given your agent to make sure that it's not authorized to access this information, or you could revoke a credential and shut down a rogue agent if you had to. I think different identity infrastructure can do that well. I think maybe certain sandboxing for high-risk functions does that well. Is there any other like hard boundaries that you're seeing that you think are particularly effective nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, the best boundary is to not build the thing that like kind of checks the boxes that will turn it into a risk. We talked a little bit about education. A lot of what I talk about with security teams in large companies nowadays is like this concept of a lethal trifecta, where you have an agent that is hooked up to unsanitized user input, has access to sensitive data, and then it has some way to speak to the outside world. It sounds obvious when you say it out loud and you put it that way, but a lot of times like the fact that the data is like untrusted, or the input is untrusted, or the fact that something can be exfiltrated, like those possibilities are obfuscated in a complex application. So I think that sort of lethal trifecta analysis, or having control over the tools that the agents are hooked up with, I think that's also really important to be able to detect and prevent certain combinations that would enable an attacker to like misuse an agent. In other words, I think we're basically saying that the same thing but we want to make it impossible, even in the worst case, right? Like in a world where you cannot trust the agent, it should still not be possible to do bad things.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%. Yeah. That's what I was trying to get to also. And can Promptfoo's like code scanning for like to find AI vulnerabilities, or the red teaming help you find architectural misconfigurations or bad design patterns that make you more vulnerable and more likely to have the lethal trifecta occur?
Yeah. So on the red teaming side, we definitely like detect those, or the agents specifically go after those cases in order to detect them. This becomes really effective when you hook up your code base so that Promptfoo actually has an understanding of your architecture, how the code is built. In a lot of cases, it can just identify like the lethal trifecta issue up front and then create a proof of concept. And then at test time, so Promptfoo will receive your application's telemetry. And in most cases, like it can actually look at the tool calls and like the tools that are available. And that's another way to detect that. We have definitely, or like I've definitely wanted something lighter weight that doesn't require like you to spend live tokens on this. I think the red teaming part is necessary, but like as I mentioned, we recently came out with code scanning that lives like in GitHub or even in your IDE, because I want to flag these potential issues earlier. So there's not a perfect solution to this, but it's just like you just want to put the tools in the developers' hands, or put this in front of developers, so it just becomes something that is like better understood and kind of like flagged and looked out for and that kind of thing.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like we've talked about a lot of great insights here around like if you want to get acquired, if you want your AI startup to be successful, definitely appeal to developers. That's important. And then also, if you are building AI applications, start from the inside, work out, make sure your red teaming and your guardrails have that feedback loop. Guardrails might not be just like everything you need, like focus on hard boundaries like you were talking about, and make sure that you are not vulnerable to the lethal trifecta. How you architect your agent matters. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave our audience with in terms of what's the maybe one or two like best things they could do or they should care about, especially in the next like year as AI security is evolving, that they should focus on?
I guess like forward looking, I think the main thing that I would call out, which I did mention earlier, but I think AI security looks very different over this year than it has in the past 2 years. And it's mainly because the architectures are getting more complex, which means it's no longer sufficient to just try a bunch of inputs and look at the outputs. And that's kind of like the default method of every tool out there, including Promptfoo, right? So that's why we are investing more in kind of like the ability to integrate the code, the telemetry, et cetera. That's why I'm kind of a broken record on that, is that I know everyone's like, oh, AI is like moving so quickly, blah, blah, blah. But in this case, I actually do think something needs to look very different on the AI security side. And if you don't understand that, if you are just going with a naive red teaming solution that just tries some inputs or like has a list of prompt injections or like slightly mutates those prompt injections, you are not actually doing AI security. You are doing like a basic adversarial evaluation, which I think is not enough. So it's kind of my 2 cents, or how I'm thinking about this. And then for me personally, like I'm thinking, how do I leverage being on the inside at a foundation lab and having access to the research, having direct access to like the models and inference? Like, what are the new ways that we can come up with in order to solve this problem specifically for agent security? So that's what's on my mind for the next year.
Amazing. Yeah, super excited to get to need to follow Promptfoo and all of the ways that you'll make OpenAI security stronger. Where can people go to try Promptfoo? Is the open source still available? And what's the future look like for people that want to try Promptfoo?
Yeah, the open source is definitely still available. We are building and maintaining it, making commits and improvements every single day. Best way to try it out would be to go to promptfoo.dev and just follow the instructions from there.
Amazing. Thank you. And then where can people connect with you if they want to join in on the conversation?
That's a good question. So it kind of depends, like what part of the conversation do they want to be part of? I think for anyone who wants to be like developer and open source focused, the GitHub and the Discord are a great way to do that. We like actively monitor both of them and depend pretty heavily on the community for changes and suggestions and that kind of thing. And That's always been the case. We have, at this point, close to 300 contributors, like people who have actually written code for Promptfoo, but probably 1,000 other people who maybe didn't write the code, but who helped shape Promptfoo in some way from an open source perspective. So for folks who are interested in Promptfoo, or maybe just like getting your hands a little dirty in open source for cybersecurity, definitely check out the GitHub.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ian. Congrats on the acquisition, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Cool. You did it.